Welcome back to another video, and by the end of today's video we will be able to destroy our buildables. So as you can see, that one failed a little bit, but it does destroy, as you can see. Also we can go ahead and destroy this one as well. So yeah, let's get started. Welcome back to another video, and today we are finally going to be destroying our buildables. So now, as you can see, the wall fell apart and the foundation also fell apart. So yeah, let's get started. So since we made the adjustments in the previous video, this one is going to be quite a bit more simpler than it would have been if we didn't make those adjustments, because now we don't have to copy and paste all the code, because we're going to make some tiny adjustments. So what I'm going to have is my build master open, and in the event graph we're going to make some tiny little adjustments. So this is going to basically do these adjustments for all the other ones as well, all the other buildables except for the window, because that one does not use the master, so we're gonna have to do the adjustments separately on that one. But so let's open up our build interface as well, because I want to do some tiny adjustments for the set build cost, because we are providing the resources and we are providing the build ID. Now we still need to provide the build ID, but in the set build cost, well, resources is not enough. We will need to provide more things. We will need to provide the health amount. We will need to provide the destructible mesh. So there's going to be a few things that we will need to provide, and all of those things will come from the S-buildable structure, which holds all the information for every single one of our buildables. So instead of calling this resources, I'm going to call this buildable, and we're going to make that into our S-buildables structure. Let's compile and save this. So once we have done that, and if we go back to the build master, as you can see, we have this red thing. If we compile this, we get an error. So what I want you to do is go ahead and disconnect these resources and delete this cost, and instead promote the buildables to a variable. There we go. So now we will have the buildables variable inside of here. For some reason this made two of these, so I'm going to remove one. There we go. So we have the buildables variable and we have the build ID. Now this is good, but now by doing so, we basically killed the finishing of the build. So now if we interact with the build, it will not add those our imaginary resources. That is because, well, we are using this cost variable, and that's the only location where we are using that. So I'm going to drag in our buildable. We're going to get that, and we're going to split it. And instead of using the cost variable, I'm going to use the resources variable, like so. Well, the value essentially. I'm going to hide the unconnected pins because we don't need those. All we need is just this one. There we go. And now go ahead, just to make sure, go ahead and test this to see if it still works. So we should be able to still build, which we are not. And that is because I forgot the most important step, which is inside of our build component, we also need to make the same adjustments, because as you can see here, we are providing the resources, but we never provide the buildable information. So just to make the life a little bit easier, go ahead, delete this whole bunch that we added over there, and instead just go ahead and copy these three nodes. So we have the buildables database, and then we get a copy from a specific buildable ID. So I'm just going to right click any of these pins to recombine this, and it gives us our structure back. So now we can go ahead and plug it in over here into the buildables. There we go. So now it is going to provide that information along. So now everything should be functioning the way it was before. So those are the only two things that we need to adjust. Because we are changing basically from where we get the information, how much this build actually costs. So that is also provided in the database, if you remember, and we're going to do some adjustments in the database as well in a second, because, well, we will have a lot more things to add. So the first thing that we need to do next is we need to enable a plugin. Now this part depends on which destruction system you prefer to use. I prefer to use the Apex destruction because it is a little bit more reliable. It's technically a better, more tested build kind of thing. At least that's what it says over here. Not sure, but I am personally more accustomed to that if you use the Chaos one, go ahead, use that one. Just simply change the way how you add and create these destructibles. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the destruction, and I'm going to enable the Apex destruction system. So once you click that, it's going to require you to restart your engine. So go ahead and do that. Once you're done, it's going to bring you back to this window right here. You can go ahead and close this. Now we need to create the actual destructible meshes, because just the regular static mesh does not get destroyed. So I'm going to open up my assets folder where I have my meshes over here. So what I'm going to do is, let's start off with the door, since it's the first one in the line. I'm going to just right click this, and at the top now we should have an option called create destructible mesh. That's what I'm going to do. If we move this around a little bit, we will be able to see this a little bit better. Oh, now it loaded the texture as well. So what we need to do is we need to enable this enable impact damage. This way it will allow us to destroy this whenever we it's basically going to destroy this instantly once it collides with something. And since this is going to have physics, it's going to happen instantly, and that's exactly what we want, because this destructible mesh is going to appear just for a brief moment of time. For the most part, we're going to have the static one, which is going to stand constantly in the level, and then whenever we will like destroy the build, then it's going to replace that one with the destructible for just a couple of seconds while it falls apart, and whenever it's fallen apart, we are just simply going to destroy that actor completely. So we have this setting enabled, and then you can click on the fracture mesh and you will see how it is getting fractured whenever it is getting destroyed. Also, you can adjust a lot of settings over here. You can do all kinds of things like separate this into more pieces, and there's a whole bunch of settings which are not too important, but obviously if you want, you can go ahead and change these up a bit. Probably the most important one that you are wondering about is how you set up more pieces for this, and that is simply here in the fractured settings. Go ahead and set the cell site count. Now let's set this to like 150. Re-click the fracture mesh, and there you go. Now you can see that this has fractured into way more pieces. I'm going to leave it at default. I don't really care about this right now too much, but obviously it's a good idea to maybe adjust this for some bigger objects or whatever. So we have this. Go ahead, save this, and we need to do exactly the same thing for all the other buildables of ours. So we have the floor ceiling, create the destructible, enable the setting, fracture, you can see it, save that. So I'm going to go through all of these, and I'm going to create a destructible mesh for every single one of these instances. It's going to be quite a bit of time, but well, we will have to do that because we need these destructibles. So there we go. I have made the destructibles for every single one of my buildables, and now we need to provide this information in our database. So let's go ahead and let's start off by making the adjustments in the buildables structure, which contains the values that we are providing. So we're going to need two values today. We're going to add the destructible mesh, which then as well is the same type, destructible mesh. And then we need another one, which is going to be the health, so that we know when the build is destroyed and when we need to replace the static mesh with a destructible mesh. Now for the health value, I'm going to be using a float value. So that's good with this one. Now let's go to our buildables database, and now we need to provide this information. So the foundation one is going to be using the foundation destructible, and I'm going to set the health to 100 for every single one of my buildables essentially. So now this again is going to be a little bit of a tedious process, but we got to go through this. We need to set up all of these things, so make sure you set the correct destructibles for every single one of your buildables. Otherwise, well, if you're going to destroy something and it's going to have a different buildable, well, it's going to look a little bit awkward when you destroy a foundation and it spawns a wall for some reason, right? So go ahead and be careful with that one. So we have the window. Also for building, whenever we build, kind of, it is setting this window mesh right here, but for the window we are using two components. So again, go ahead and make sure you create the destructible mesh for just one of those windows, because we're going to spawn 2 destructibles in there. Like I mentioned in the previous video, windows are going to be a little bit different, and we're going to treat those a little bit separate. Obviously, we could have still implemented them into this master that we have right now, but it's going to create us a lot more work, and I don't think it's actually worth it that much, because it's not too much of a copy and paste, to be honest. So all good with the database. We have all the things inside of it. Let's go ahead and let's make the next necessary adjustments. So we're going to need a interface function. So let's add a new function to our buildables interface, and let's call this deal damage, so we can deal damage to our buildables. Now this needs a single input, which is the health value. So I'm just going to call this health, or you can call it value, or actually let's call this damage. That's going to be better, damage. Now we need to provide exactly the same type. We are using the float value for our health, so we're going to use the float value for the damage. You can use integers as well, but it's just easier and more simpler if you use the same type of values. You don't need to convert those that much. So that is good as well. Now let's go ahead and let's open up our build master. So here is our master, which has all the information that it needs, all the functionality that it needs, all that good stuff. Now we need to run ourselves the event deal damage. So this guy right here. Now what we're going to do from over here is, well, technically what we could do is we could get the buildable, we could split that, then we could set it, and then we can make it, and then we can connect all these pins and then change the health value. It's a doable process, it's doable, but the issue is if we add some more pins to this, then we need to reconnect those, and we might miss. You know, human errors happen, people make mistakes, we make mistakes, it's all good. So what I'm going to do instead is, whenever we set the buildables variable, then I'm going to get it at the end, I will break it, and I will promote the health to a separate variable like this. So we're going to have a separate health value, a separate health variable. So that's going to make our life a lot easier, because then we don't need to dive into the buildables variable. We can just simply use the separate health value. So now on the deal damage, what we are going to do is simply set the health, and we're going to, beforehand, we need to get the health, and then we need to remove the damage from it. So it's going to be, by default, it's going to be 100 minus, let's say, 25, and we set it to 75 then. So now that we have set our health, the next thing that we want to do is we want to check whether the health is already 0, because if it is, well, then we want to destroy this build. Now, there are a couple of more variables that we're going to introduce in a second, but first I want to show you a couple of mistakes and outcomes that could come out of a specific type of code. So first, let's go ahead and let's check if our health is above 0, and let's do an if on this. So if that is true, obviously we don't want to do anything, because we still have health, it's above 0. Now if it's not above 0, if it's 0 or maybe even less, if it's false, well, then we want to spawn our destructible. So what I'm going to do is go ahead, grab our static mesh component, and the first thing that we want to do is we want to set its visibility to false. So on false, if the health is not above 0, we want to hide our static mesh. We don't want to see it. Also, we want to make sure that we set the collision enabled to have no collision, so that the static mesh would have no collision. Otherwise, our buildable is just going to explode all over the place, and it's going to happen super quickly, and it's going to look like somebody just dropped a atomic bomb, essentially. Now, once we have done that, we now need to add our destructible. So now our static mesh is hidden, it has no collision, so now we can go ahead and add a destructible component. There we go. Now for the relative transform in this specific, in the master, we can just leave it at the default values. So right click and split it, and it's going to be in the 0, 0, 0, just like the static mesh component itself is. Now the next thing is we need to provide this destructible component a mesh. Now we don't need to do it over here, because we can only set one over here. We want to specify a dynamic one, whichever comes with the buildable. So from the return value, we can go ahead and just set the destructible mesh. There we go. And now for the new mesh, let's go ahead, let's grab our buildable. I'm just going to split it right here, and I'm going to plug in the buildable's destructible mesh value. There we go. So now it's going to automatically set it for this component. Now, one thing that we do need to enable in this node, so if you select it, you can change its default parameters. What we need to set is to simulate physics so that these pieces would fall apart and drop on the ground essentially. Now, with this specific code that we have here, we're going to have a couple of issues. So let me just show you. I basically want to make this simple, show you some mistakes that we could have, and then work on top of this. So if we now hit play, we have an error. Yeah, so obviously the error is in our build window because this one still uses the old cost and all that stuff. So it's gonna give us an error. So just feel free to disconnect the resources and delete this set and just simply ignore it for now. We're gonna fix this in a second. I'm gonna leave it be for now, but we are gonna come back to this and make adjustments for this one as well. But let's first work with the master so that the majority of the builds would work already. And one more thing that I just remember, before we can test this, we gotta provide the actual damage as well, right? So we have no way of running this. So inside of our third-person character, we're going to run this event, and again, select some kind of a key. I'm just gonna have the keyboard key 2 for now. Later, you want to run this code from an overlap event from a weapon that will collide with this buildable. We're gonna do that later on once we introduce the inventory system for this. So on pressed, what we are going to do is go ahead and run our trace. So basically just a regular trace returns the hit actor, and from here we are going to deal damage. Now for now, I'm just going to provide 25, so I need 4 hits to destroy the buildable, and that's it, as simple as that. I'm going to build 2 of these because we will have a couple of issues. So I'm going to finish this one. There we go. So now if I spam the keyboard key 2, there we go, the buildable got destroyed. Now the issue is that if we spam it some more, you can see it spams even more and more and more of these destructables, and we can create like a volcano out of this. Another issue is that we can spam 2 over here, and eventually it's going to destroy this one as well. And that's not what we want, because that thing is not yet built. We don't need the destructible, and now we have a huge mess. And if we keep on spamming 2, it's going to keep on creating us a destructible components, and it's going to give us a huge pile of derbis or whatever it's called, and we don't want that. So we're going to need to do some more adjustments over here. So the first thing is I'm going to bring this part of the code back a little bit, like so, and also I'm going to reconnect false to true, like this. Now the reason for that is we're going to use not values, so those will flip the true and false around. So at this point we're checking if the health is above 0, and now if it's true, we don't want to destroy it. But if we grab a not, it's going to flip the values, so it's going to tell false whenever the health is below 0 or below, and we're going to flip that to be the true value. And now it's going to work through the true branch. But that's not enough, because we are still stuck with exactly the same code as we just did. We need to introduce some more things to this. The first thing is whether we actually apply damage to an object, because if the build is not yet finished, we don't even want to apply the damage to it. So whenever we try to deal the damage, first things first, we do an if branch check, and we check if the build is finished. Now if the build is finished, if that is true, we go ahead, we continue with the code, and we reduce its health. Now we need to introduce another variable which we don't have at this point. So I'm going to create ourselves a new variable, and I'm going to call this is dead. And this variable will basically represent whether the build has been destroyed. And if it has been destroyed, we don't want to do really anything with it. So we have, first we need to set it to true. So over here, after this if branch check, whenever we have checked that the health has dropped below 0, is 0 or below 0, then we want to set this variable to be true. And then also what we want to do is we want to run this thing over here. So whenever we try to deal damage, we gotta check if it's dead, because if it's already dead, we don't even need to deal any damage to it. So now if it's dead, well, the values again don't match up, because if it's dead, it's going to be true, but whenever it's true, we want to make sure that this goes to the false, right? So it doesn't deal any damage. So I'm going to flip this to not, and whenever it is alive, it's going to set that it's true. And then if we combine the is finished, if it's finished and if it's alive, then it's going to return true, and we're going to be able to reduce the health. But if it's going to be dead, it's going to return false because we flipped the true and false around. It's going to go through this route, and it's no longer going to interfere with any of the other code. So now we should be good to go. So we have one over here, spam 2. There we go, we destroyed it, and that's it. Now this one we can spam 2 as long as we want. Nothing's going to happen. We can also spam over this one. As you can see, there's only one of these instances, and nothing is happening. Now once we finish this, obviously we can go ahead and destroy that one as well. There we go. So we have that part finished and all ready to go. Now the next thing is, the last thing actually, is to provide the same information for the build window, and it's very simple. All we got to do is grab all of this code that we have over here, and we need to copy into the build window. Boom, we copied it over. So let's fix our window now. We need to promote is dead to a variable because we want to notify if it's dead. We got to promote the health to a variable. So right click and promote that. I moved this a little too close. So I'm going to move this down a bit. And there are a couple of tiny adjustments that we also need to make for this whole function. And also we got to make sure that we set the buildable and the health for it. So from the set build cost, again, promote it to a variable like so. Promote build ID to a variable. We'll set it for the build ID. And then also set the health value to be whatever we have in the buildables. So we're going to split that and provide the health like so. So that's good for the set build cost. But also we need to do some tiny adjustments over here wherever we add the destructible component. Because, well, we don't really care about the collision and the visibility of the base component because, well, it's empty. We don't really care about it anymore. So instead of using a static mesh component, we need to go ahead and grab both of these other child components, which are our window side one and the other window side. So now just go ahead and plug all of those into the targets. So I'm going to delete the static mesh component, and I'm going to plug in both of these static meshes into the visibilities target node and also in the set collision enabled node. So I'm going to have both of those go in both of these nodes. So it's going to set the visibility to false to both of them and also disable the collision for both of them. Now, since we have two of those windows, we also will want to create two of these destructible components. So go ahead and copy this node once more and plug it into the execution route so that there's two of them. Now, one more thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that the other return node also goes to over here, which is the set destructible mesh, so that it would set the destructible mesh, exactly the same mesh for both of these destructible components. Now, the last thing is these no longer will use the relative 0 positions because, well, they don't. If you click on the relative, the one who tells where the relative position is the master component, which stands at 0, 0, 0. If we select any of the child components, you will see that this one's location is 89, this one is minus 89. So we want to make sure that we use that specific location, and also keep in mind we need to use the same rotation as well, so it looks exactly the same. So in the event graph for both of these nodes, I'm going to right click any of these three last pins, and I'm going to recombine them for both of these. And then I'm going to grab, let's just grab one of them. So let's grab the static mesh first, the first one. And from this, we need to get relative transform and just simply plug that in. There we go. Now copy and paste this once more, plug it into the second one, but obviously instead of using the static mesh, so the first component, we want to use the second one, so the static mesh 1. There we go. So now it will grab this component's location, rotation, and scale, and it's going to put it in the same exact location. And that's it. So now, if we build a window, let's finish it. For some reason, does not want to get finished. That's interesting. Yeah, so I killed the finishing of the build. So go ahead and the cost. Inside of the cost, delete that, and instead use the buildable and we want to use the resource value, so this one right here instead. That's right. That's why it didn't seem to work. So now build a window, 3 clicks, finished, and now spam 2. There we go, and the window has collapsed. So that's going to be it for today's episode. As of right now, also, you probably noticed that, well, I'm leaving those builds in the world. Let them stay for a bit, because we have more issues that we need to deal with first. Because it doesn't really matter at this point if we leave those pieces in the world or not, because it still will look ridiculous no matter what we do. Because if we destroy the wall, as you can see, the window still stays, and it's just simply funny, right? So we can destroy everything, and we can have these floating doors and the floating windows and all that stuff, and regardless of anything, it still looks very, very funny. So we want to make sure we fix those issues as well, and then we're going to clean up the garbage that we have on the ground as well. So yeah, that's going to be it for today's video. Make sure to leave a like, comment, all that good stuff. Yeah, see you in the next one. Peace.